In this video I'm showing how I varnish a paddleboard. So the real key to varnishing is to start with a really clean surface. So I'm going to start out, I'm going to give the whole board a thorough wiping with paint thinner. Whatever thinner you need to use is listed right on the can of the varnish you're going to use. Use the same thinner that you thin the varnish with. So this particular board was already cleaned once, so it's starting out fairly clean. I've already varnished the other side, so just giving it all a thorough wiping, removing any fingerprints, any dust that's happened to accumulate on the board, and most of all, checking to see there's no defects that are from the sanding that are going to show through the varnish. Anything that shows right now while I'm wiping it down is probably going to show under the varnish board. With the first wiping done, what I do is I take my rag, I fold it and find a fresh side, and then I'm going to stroke from one end of the board to the other in one continuous pass, just removing any swirl marks from the initial cleaning. I make sure that I use the same leading edge as I go from one end to the other, and that makes sure that any dust that does accumulate on the rag doesn't end up on the board. Again, I work from the center out towards the rails in nice steady strokes, and I'm watching to make sure that I'm not leaving any dust or any streaks behind on my rag here. So now I'm measuring some of the thinner to thin my varnish. So I don't have a specific ratio because each varnish brand and even the same can, as you use it, you have to add more varnish. The thinner evaporates out of it. So basically, once you figure out the consistency that you need your varnish, basically thin it that amount. I just use the measuring cup basically as a rough gauge that from one batch to the next I can have consistent results. So when you're varnishing, what you do is you first load the varnish onto the board, and then you stroke it into the wet area that you've already done. You just keep repeating this process. First you load it onto the board, then you stroke it out. I tend to do this about 3 times, and then I'll tip off that area and move to the next area. So the whole key with varnishing is that you want as few wet edges as possible, and you want to get the varnish on the board with as few strokes as possible. So first you get it all on, and then you go back and you tip off the whole section that you've done. So first here I'm just making sure there's no drips on the rail, and then with very light brush pressure I tip off the board. It's just nice steady strokes, very light brush pressure. Just make sure that the varnish is as even as possible with no air bubbles. So with the whole top section tipped off now I'm just going to go around and tip off the rails. And this is just an important area to make sure that you haven't loaded any varnish up and you're not going to have any runs, drips, or sags or any other problems. So that first section's done. Now I'm just going to start copying that on this side of the board. So load the varnish on and stroke it out. So it's somewhat important to work fairly quickly while you're varnishing. Your varnish only has a certain amount of time that you can touch it with the brush without disturbing it and leaving stroke marks. So basically, just try to get it on and just keep working from one end of the board to the other and tying in your sections that you've already done. When you get to areas like the handle or the fin box or anything that kind of sticks out, your vent, any of those things, I tend to work the varnish around those areas first as I get near them, and then I stroke it out with the rest of it. That gives it a chance for any drips or anything to happen, and you just catch them as you're going. So pretty much everything that I do, I work from the center out towards the rail. That allows any drips that happen to be just naturally picked up by the brush as you stroke out the next area. And that's basically it. You just work from one end to the other, and if once you have a bit of a pattern going or a system going, do a few little sections, get down low, look with a different light, make sure there's no dry spots, and then tip off the section and you're done. Varnishing is actually not too bad once you've done it a couple times. It's a bit intimidating at first. I'm not a varnish expert by any means. I've only ever varnished wooden boards. I've never tried to varnish anything with vertical surfaces or anything like that. With a flat surface like this, where the rails are the only challenging part, it's not difficult at all. So the other thing I'll add is that if you do happen to look back and see a mistake that you've made in an area you've already done, I think you're probably best off just to leave it and come back and fix that problem the next day. Um, Once the varnish starts to get sticky or tacky or whatever, any amount of brushing there, you're probably causing more problems than good, and they're usually easier to fix the next day. So, thanks very much for watching. If you have any questions or comments or whatever, leave them below or send them to me, and I'll be happy to answer them.